What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and we are getting back into the horror theme. It's been a little while, so we're going back in. And I have got someone who we've had on before and is bringing a special kind of horror to the show. I'm bringing on author Peter Laws. Peter, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. It's nice to be back. How are you doing?
I'm good, mate. I'm good.
How you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Yeah, I feel like I should be buying you a drink when I said that.
I'm doing good though. I'm doing really good, and thank you for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
But you're not just coming on the Goodness Here and Heart. You're coming here because you've got a new book out. The latest Matt Hunter book is out.
Yeah, which is great. Yeah, I'm excited about that. A few years ago, I got the idea of starting to write novels, which was quite a new thing for me. And amazingly, after quite a lot of rejection, I managed to get a 2-book deal, and then here I am. The 4th novel is out just come out in shops on February the 20th. So very exciting to see that kind of ongoing series, and me having the chance to tell sort of scary crime fiction stories with hints of the supernatural.
Yeah, obviously I've read the first 2. And thoroughly enjoyed them.
Really lovely, thank you.
It's just to give you the concept, it's a professor called is he a professor?
Yeah, yes, it's called Professor Matt Hunter.
Hunter.
He's an ex-church minister turned kind of atheist academic who he spends his time sort of trying to debunk the Christian faith. Because he's got some issues, he's got some cosmic issues with religion. But at the same time, because he's got this previous training in religion, he is employed by or sort of deployed by the police if they ever come across a crime that has some sort of weird religious or occult type element. And so in the books, he is sort of drawn into all manner of like creepy and strange and usually quite violent crimes.
Yeah, I'd say if you're into sort of that sort of, like I say, crime fiction with that hint of supernatural, that sort of like, I wouldn't say a hint, like some really sort of strong sort of elements in it.
That's true. Yeah,
they're really good. I do recommend them.
Thank you.
And there are parts of these books that are legitimately scary.
That's encouraging, and it's strange actually, because I had some messages recently of like I saw someone had posted about the book, and it said like Unleashed, the second one, they'd said I couldn't finish this, I was too scared, and it was like that's kind of good. That's a good compliment. The
other thing is, I think for this sort of this sort of genre or sort of like area of sort of fiction and stuff. I like that this is almost as well sort of like typically English or typically British. Yeah. He's a very sort of like just a sort of down to earth sort of kind of guy, and he's obviously gone through some stuff, but it's family. He's got his family, he's got his life, and he's an interesting character. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I actually deliberately did that because so many times, particularly in kind of crime dramas, the like protagonist, the sort of the cop or whatever, is deeply troubled, so he's struggling with alcoholism, or he's like his wife has left him, and there's a place for all that, but I just wanted this guy to be happy. He's a geek himself, he builds arcade cabinets at home, and he loves Star Wars and all that sort of stuff, but he has a very happy family life, and yet he just gets plunged into these cases, and particularly with Possessed, which is the latest book, they're starting to take their toll on him, psychologically, because you can only see so many dead bodies before you start freaking out.
Yes, it starts to chip away a little bit. But so the latest book, Possessed, is there a blurb? Can you give us a little bit of a hint without spoiling it too much?
Yeah, there is a blurb. Basically, hang on, where's the book? copy of the book somewhere. Here we go. Yeah, what does it say on the back? It's called Possessed, and it says, here we go. When a blood-soaked man is discovered with the word Baal Berith scored into his flesh, the bewildered police call on expert Professor Matt Hunter to assist, and before long a gruesome discovery is made and Hunter is drawn into a frenzied murder investigation. But then with a fury of media interest in the case and the emerging link to a documentary on demonic possession, Hunter is unable to escape a dark world of exorcism and violence, even when events spiral frighteningly out of control. Cue thunderclap. yeah. Basically, it's kind of starts like a murder case where the supposed murderer claims to have been possessed by a demon, an ancient Babylonian demon from the Bible, and he gets drawn into that. But as the book develops, this kind of TV crew want to come along and film what is actually one of the reasons why I wrote the book, and document what they're calling in the book a possession epidemic. And by that I mean I went to an academic conference. I write for a magazine called the Fortean Times, and I was covering this academic conference for them. This was about 4 years ago, maybe more. And at this academic place, they were having lectures about the growth in possession cases today. And this wasn't a Christian place. It wasn't like a church Vatican-y type thing or anything. It was just a secular academic conference where they were noting that these days more and more people were requesting exorcism than ever before. And there was this global boom. And I just found that fascinating. I was like, crikey, I thought we kind of moved on from this stuff. But if anything, we're embracing it even more, or some people are.
Yeah, and well, this is sort of where we sort of we were talking online about just another sort of project I'm working on, and you sort of mentioned this, and so we got talking. That sort of how you sort of ended up on the show, and it sort of fascinated me, this idea that, as you said, the statistics show that there was more requests and sort of demand. Yeah. I suppose it's more sort of request. I suppose you do demand an exorcism.
Yeah.
Of people looking to be exorcised and claiming that the existence of demons, and so we started sort of saying about the idea of like possession movies. But what was interesting is, as I sort of mentioned just off air, I went on a bit of a rabbit hole on YouTube about this idea of possession.
Oh, okay.
And it's a real sort of interesting thing. It does seem to have sort of like just taken off. Like there is, like you said, there is actual like debate now about, okay, is this a mental health epidemic, or is it some sort of religious thing? It's people are like talking about it in serious terms. It's fascinating that it's sort of it's out there, and I believe like the Vatican has actually put out actual statements about it, and one of the films that will come about is actually about a book about how the Vatican handle it. So it's out there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Vatican were having to put on training courses for priests because there was more demand for this, and you will see that if you look at some of the statistics, that in places, let's say in regions in France, for example, where they might have had, and I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but it might have been like, let's say, like 5 requests for exorcism like 10 years ago, and then recently it's gone up to say 20 or that sort of increase. And what's very interesting as well is because of this kind of growth in demand, the people meeting this demand, there's a kind of indie exorcism scene developed where people who are not ordained, they are not members of the clergy, are setting themselves up as look, I can cast out demons, and so you can, if you feel you've got a demon, you can be exorcised via Skype or via FaceTime. And
there's an app. Are you basically saying there's an app for that?
There's an app for that. Yeah, exactly. But there really is, in the sense that, and I don't personally have a problem with that. Some people think, and actually this comes up in the book. Matt Hunter was like rolling his eyes because the idea of people learning about how to exercise someone via YouTube or, but I mean, to me that's just a natural way that we share information today. But obviously, there is a big danger because, at the very least, if you remember the clergy, and as you know, I suppose maybe I don't know if your listeners know this, but I'm also an ordained church minister, and you have to go through so many checks and balances to be. I mean, it's a long process of discernment, and then if the church don't think you're suitable for the job, they'll just say no, you can't do it, and all throughout the job, it takes about 6 years to go through the whole sort of procedure, because you're dealing with human beings, and there's a real pastoral element of danger. But what happens with these indie guys? I don't want to assume they're all Philistines, but if I just do a quick Skype call with some vulnerable young man, living in Poland or something, how do I know what effect that's going to have on his life? So it's dangerous. Yeah.
No, yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the thing. I think is you spot on. It's sort of one of the things that sort of I learned from doing it, going down this rabbit hole is, as you said, this thing around checks and balances. Like, it's not, if someone does turn up and sort of says either they or sort of someone they know is exhibiting behaviours that they consider to be demonic.
Yeah.
Like the church doesn't just jump on it and be like, right, pass me the holy water and the nearest Bible.
No.
They go in, they'll bring in psychologists, they'll bring in sort of therapists, they'll bring in people to discuss this with them.
Yeah, and actually this is a common thing you see in horror films, which can be frustrating. I always used to get frustrated with horror films where, if some demonic activity was happening in a film, let's say, and people would go to the church for advice, and the church would often be kind of reluctant, like they won't grant an exorcism on this house. And you think, oh my, come on, it's so obviously like they're being traumatized by the devil. But actually that it's quite a realistic view, is that for many churches they are ultra cautious about this because it's so easy to misdiagnose a mental health issue as this, and it's right to have a cynicism. If someone just rocks up and says, "I'm possessed by devils," you're like, well, hang on a minute, let's check into this. So it's wise to be cautious, I think, because there are inherent dangers in just going full force into exorcism. I don't know if when you were looking through YouTube, you were looking into some of the cases where people have died as a result of exorcism. The most famous of Anneliese Michel in Germany, who died of starvation during a horrific exorcism in, I think it was the 70s, and you can hear audio recordings of that on YouTube. It's just chilling. It's scary.
That was, and when I said to you, I was basically sort of sat in bed one night just flicking through these videos and stuff, and it was you got sort of dimmed lamplight. I'm sat there just watching this. Yeah, that's what I listened to. I listened to the audio recordings of Anneliese Michel, and I had my nightlight on pretty much for the rest of the night, because that is it is chilling. It is, and to see the images of her before and after, or before and during this, is the poor girl went through an ordeal, and obviously didn't come out of it.
Exactly.
So I mean. And it should be noted that the priests and the priest, and her parents were taken to court and tried for manslaughter. So, there was a real debate in Germany at the time as to whether or not the church should have been involved and what their culpability was and all that sort of stuff. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think this topic, and you, if you're listening to those videos, they're chilling. In whether you're an atheist or whether you're a theist, it doesn't matter in a way. I mean, obviously, if you believe in God and the potential of the devil coming into your life, then it's particularly scary because you think, this could happen to me, I suppose. But even if you have no faith in anything, like supernatural, I mean, you're still looking at a horrendous human tragedy. And so it's just gut-wrenching on every level. And so, and I suppose this is why I was fascinated by this topic and thought it would be rich pickings for a kind of thriller that thrives on like misery and death.
Well, one of the things I was curious about, and I'll be especially to ask you about, actually, is this increase in this spate of possessions or alleged possessions.
Yeah.
Does it sit within the sort of what I was supposed to be with sort of the Judeo-Christian religions? You know, does it sit within that sort of bracket, or you know, is it sort of acknowledged in other more Eastern religions or other religions as well? Sort of, you know.
It's all over. You know, it's not just a kind of a Christian thing. It's you know, you'll see this idea of possession in all loads of different forms of religion, and also, I mean, funnily enough, yesterday I did about, I don't know, like 14 or something interviews with the BBC about this new book, and with different radio stations, and one of the DJs, or the presenters, asked me a question which took me aback. But at first he says, well, is possession by the devil not just like, why is that different than Christians who say they have God in them? And like, are they not possessed by God? Like, what's the difference? And I was like, oh, well, I mean, my point was, I suppose, the idea of God is like a benevolent character who's kind, and whereas the devil doesn't want to like sort of grab people between the legs and stuff like, and all those sorts of kind of attacking things. But I've subsequently thought about that and thought, yeah, you know, this idea of even having a benevolent supernatural being inside you, as it were, guiding you, can be very disturbing to many people, and so that's why people can find Christians like scary, because it's, you know, they've got this thing in them.
It's a good point, because I hadn't made that connection, because I suppose you do automatically go to, you know, the thing you do see, the horror and the, you know, the negative side, the demonic side, but you do see these sort of like evangelical you know, churches, and where you do see some sort of minister sort of casting out demons, you know, sort of like, be gone, demons.
Yeah, exactly.
But then you also sort of see those audiences, and they'll have like the shakes, or they'll do sort of, you know, unusual things, whatever, and they'll say, "Oh no, I was channeling the Holy Spirit or something."
Spirit, yeah.
So
yeah, exactly. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, it does swing both ways, I suppose, if
yeah,
you know, if you're to believe it.
Yeah.
So really, the idea was, because I do find this fascinating, and we did talk about how this then sort of like materializes in fiction, in these films. One of the things I was curious about is, we all start, I think, with the obvious, The Exorcist, from 1973.
Yeah.
And then I was sort of just looking, and I was like, oh, there's this, and there's a few others. I mean, there's a sort of a weird sort of Lovecraftian film called Possession from the early 80s with Sam Neill, and then that's it. And then I love that film. It's a great, very weird film, but it's very good. But then all of a sudden, like from about 2000, literally like the later 2005, 2006, you get a couple, and then there's just loads of them.
Yes, there is, and I mean, there were a lot of possession movies, particularly in the 70s, and a lot of maybe kind of foreign language ones that don't necessarily make everyone's radar. But there was a steady flow in the 70s, and then it kind of sort of chilled out a bit. But you're absolutely right. You know, later on in the kind of 2000s, there was this kind of explosion of possession films, and I think there are reasons for that. I think on one sense, we were living in an age where religion itself was a scary threat, because particularly with 9/11 and the idea of kind of religiously fueled terrorism, and it became natural to think of, you know, the religious topics as not being necessarily about nice things, but could be about terrifying things. So the Christian worldview of the devil may have come into play. But I think actually one of the reasons why there were so many possession movies is maybe why there were so many zombie films as well, is that it's just really easy on a budget to make a exorcism film. It's not that hard. You know, you're not making a werewolf transformation. That's really hard to do on a budget. But, you know, you can like slap a bit of latex on someone's face and get them to swear at the cross, and you're like, hey, we're there, we're done.
I say we're off to the races.
Yeah.
And I do think you're right. I mean, you know, we talked about the Annalise Michel case, and that was one of the early ones of the 2000s. It's called The Exorcism of Emily Rose. So they obviously changed the names and stuff. And that that film is interesting because it plays out like a courtroom drama with flashbacks to the exorcism and stuff. And that sort of comes in around 2005.
Yeah, that's right.
But then you get like you do sort of get that, you know, obviously there's a load of like schlocky ones that come along, but there's a couple that sort of really stuck out to me that I found.
Okay.
There's three in particular I thought were really interesting that sort of around this period. The first one is but I'll do it in order. It's called The Right. It's got Anthony Hopkins.
Oh yes, yeah.
And
Based on the book by Matt Baglio, I think it was called. Which I read the book and saw the film.
Yeah, the book was called The Right, The Making of a Modern Exorcist. And that was one of the things I said when I was looking, this idea that, no, they don't just... Well, there were two things in this film that I was like, that seems odd. I'm very used to this notion, as you said, of sort of like, you know, call in Father Dyer, and then it's sort of an hour and a half of sort of like throwing holy water and shouting at a possessed girl. And it's all action-packed. But then with this film, it was very much about... You know, firstly, no, we don't just accept anybody off the street who tells me they're possessed. Yeah. Like, we look at all these bits and pieces. And then there was the notion of repeat visits. Like, oh no, it's not just a one really intense night of, you know, lightning, you said, lightning and, you know, floating beds and other stuff. Like, no, these people come back again and again and we'll do sessions. And I was like, and that when I learned that actually that is real.
Yeah,
I was fascinated by that these people are living with this for days, months, years.
Yeah, and that's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. I wouldn't have thought to mention it, but yeah, you're right. The repeat visit thing is certainly a feature of real life possession cases, and in some ways, and I think in the book, Matt Hunter character points this out and is saying, well, you know, this is symbolic or symptomatic of people who really are struggling with mental health issues and not getting it diagnosed properly and not getting the proper medical help. So they'll go in for the sort of the quick fix of, let's say, an exorcism, and then it lasts for a little while and then it wears off again and they go back over and over and over again. And so if you're a cynical person and you don't believe in the supernatural, it makes sense that someone would keep coming back, because you'd say, well, the exorcism doesn't do anything. But then... If you're a religious mindset, you might simply say, but the devil is so wily, he keeps going and going. So yeah, it's and it's one of the things that I thought about a lot for this book, because the idea that let's say, like in The Exorcist, for example, the original film The Exorcist, once the little girl Regan is possessed, she's just full on possessed for like the whole film, pretty much. She's nice at the beginning and then she's constantly possessed. She stays in the same place for all the time, in the house, and that's it. And it's scary and all that. But then there was a blaxploitation version of The Exorcist that came out called Abby, which I quite like, in 1974, which was a sort of, well, people call it a rip-off version of The Exorcist, I guess it was. But it had its own charm and its own angles. And in that, Abby would slip into the possession mode and then slip out of it. And she would be out and about, living normal life, going to like the discotheque of the 70s. And I found that fascinating, because that was actually more realistic. That's more like the real experience of people who claim to be possessed. They live their normal life. And I would recommend a documentary called I think it's Italian documentary called Deliver Us, which came out in 2016, and that follows Father Cataldo Migliazzo, who's this 80-year-old Italian veteran exorcist who basically finds himself in high demand because of this boom in exorcism. And this just follows his mass exorcisms that he puts down, that he offers every Tuesday. Every Tuesday he does a 3-hour service where people come and they sit in the crowd, and he does the exorcism stuff from the front of the stage, from the pulpit, and then people start freaking out. And in that film, it follows some of the people who are possessed, and you'll see them in their normal everyday life being normal, and then they're sitting in the church and he mentions the name of Jesus or something, and they start twitching and start moaning and start weeping. I found that a very good documentary to look at the more banal side of possession. It's not all like spinning heads and stuff. It's kind of human tragedy at heart.
it makes you wonder. I mean, I'm coming from, like you said, sort of a more of an agnostic or atheist position. It's that
sure.
thing of, well, if you're going through your daily life, I mean, there are times you get to an emotional state where you act out and you go, that wasn't me, that's not who I am. But
yeah,
but it's sort of like just build up a frustration or whatever. But you carry on. And so if these people are doing these daily things, so what triggers them to if they are churchgoers, is it then them feeling uncomfortable on a, when they do visit the church, or is there something else? Because some of the real life cases I read about, and I'll reference Annalise Michel again. There was a couple of others, and they seem to have this. Annalise Michel actually is a quite a good example, but there was another one I completely forgot the name of now. But they were both sort of committed, devout sort of Christians or Catholics, Roman Catholics.
Yeah.
And it was like a change in them in how they felt towards religious iconography or just the thought of going to church and these other things. And everything else, like I say, seemed fine. They would carry on with their daily life, but the thought of these specific elements of religious iconography really seem to bother them. It grows from there. That's why I wonder if it's something around that.
Well, quite possibly. And this is where, I think popular culture is interesting in this debate of the exorcism, because, in this novel I've written, Possessed, what happens with Matt Hunter, who's this cynic, he's surrounded by more and more people who claim to be possessed, and they're doing all of the things you expect a possessed person to do. So they're swearing, they're saying sexually shocking things, they're averting their eyes and flinching from religious symbols. And so in their head they think, well, I'm clearly possessed because I'm doing these things. Whereas Matt Hunter's coming across and saying, you don't understand, but you have subconsciously learned what culture thinks a possessed person acts like. Films like The Exorcist, for example, has almost taught us the cues to be possessed. And so for some reason, if we think we're possessed, we might actually start, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We start acting even subconsciously like the people we've seen in exorcism movies. And Matt's point is no, you think this is a sign that you're authentically possessed, but actually it's just it's a sign that this is a social construct, that this is not real. But then, of course, creepy things happen, which make them think. And this is what gives the shiver down the spine, I think, with the subject of exorcism. For me, I think so much of the kind of the reactions of people who are possessed could be explained in human terms. It's not that hard to be spitting on a cross or scared of a cross. It's not that hard to be, to say abusive things to people or whatever. So all of that stuff you can go, oh, well, that could clearly be just human nature. It's not a slam dunk that the devil's in the room. But then I do get creeped out though when I hear about priests or clergy who have gone into situations where perhaps they've sat with a person who claims to be possessed, and then this person has a kind of forbidden knowledge. This is one sign, and so they'll suddenly be saying stuff like say the possessed person will say, I know why your sister killed herself in 1889. And the minister's like, holy crap, how do they know that?
Yeah.
And I know who you're having an affair with, or whatever, and that sort of stuff. I mean, I suppose you could say it's psychic. I don't know, just mind reading or something. But that sort of stuff's spooky. That's not even to mention the more dramatic stuff that's been claimed of people coughing up nails, and eyes rolling over white and levitation. I mean, all that sort of stuff obviously would be in some ways a kind of slam dunk evidence that something's going on, but at the same time, there's not many YouTube videos where that happens.
Well, that takes us on to one of the other films, because you're right about the sort of the more dramatic. I like this idea of the sort of the banal existence of exorcisms versus, say, the dramatic. The film Deliver Us from Evil from 2014. Oh, that's
Scott Derrickson, who also did Emily Rose, I think. Yeah,
he did. Yeah. And this is based on a series of books by a guy called Ralph Sacchi, who was a former NYPD officer.
Yeah.
And the film itself follows that sort of one, or I think a couple of the stories combined for one of his books called Beware the Night. And this guy claims he's a bit like the Warrens in the his claims sort of start off in that sort of relatively banal sort of with dramatic things, but then end up in sort of like, you know, the Stephen King sort of territory at times.
Yeah.
And like you say, so some of his stories again of you know the film and the stories in the book are about soldiers that have come back from a war in sort of a Middle Eastern area, having carried back a possession and some other bits and pieces. But then there's other claims, and one of the interesting things about this is it's not all specifically Christian or specifically Catholic or Jewish. Like it carries on through all those different bits and pieces. He sort of says, like, I cover all the bases. And then, like you say, it does start to go off the deep end of sort of like, and then there was possession, and then I saw this demonic being, and all this stuff. And you think, you're saying it, and your books state it, but in this, you know, sure, especially in New York, like someone would have sort of, you know, and so I think when you get to these sorts of cases, because Deliverance from Evil actually isn't a bad film. I do like Scott Derrickson as a director, and it's not a bad film. But when you get to sort of Ralph Saatchi, you sort of say, I think the embellishments that you are clearly giving here are almost shooting you in the foot of sort of, you know, of credibility. Yeah, and it tars everybody else then.
No, I agree, and like you mentioned Elizabeth Warren, and she also did something in a documentary once that did the same thing for me. I mean, it's not like I was like a total believer in the Warrens. I mean, I'm fascinated by the Warrens, and I find them interesting not only because I like the paranormal and stuff, but they come from an era which continually fascinates me, which is the sort of the 70s into the early 80s. I love that idea of kind of the paranormal world of the 70s. I've always loved that, and so they're really part of that. But so I like their stuff because I'm interested in it. But I once saw there's a documentary called My Amityville Horror, which is actually a very good documentary.
Yes. That film. That's a tragic documentary.
Yeah, I think, and I really recommend it. It's an excellent. I mean, I love the Amityville Horror stuff anyway. I love the first film. I think it's really good, and the second one as well. But anyway, on that documentary, Elizabeth Warren is like talking about all her claims, and then she pulls out like this nail, like a metal nail or something, and I'm sure she says something like, "Oh, and this is the actual nail that was used to nail Christ to the tree or to the cross." And I was thinking, like, do you really believe that? I mean, and that's so unlikely, and yeah, so sometimes these people can. Yeah, you're right. Like, trip up any credibility they may have had by making claims which are maybe unnecessary. I don't know, but
and the Amityville, the whole Amityville situation is a really interesting one actually, especially when you get to this idea of sort of possession and demonic influence, because it's a double header. You know,
yes.
You sort of get the DeFeo murders. Of 70, I think 73, 74, whatever it was.
Yeah, that's right, 73.
And, you know, obviously, Butch DeFeo, Ronnie Butch DeFeo, sort of when he committed that crime, when he was taken in and arrested, one of his many defences, I should say. So, you know, everyone jumps at this one, but one of his many defences was, I heard voices, and these demonic voices told me to do it, which is then taken for the Amityville 2, The Possession, for 1982. They sort of roll with that sort of idea.
Yes.
You know, and one of those things that the sort of people suggest supports that is that when he committed the crime, he used a rifle that is sort of renowned for being relatively loud. It is a rifle. Yet all his family were killed in their beds. Like, nobody appeared to be reacting.
Yeah, that is a bit strange. That's true. I mean, you were right, by the way. It was 1974. Now I think about it. But yeah, that's what's interesting about, like, sometimes with horror films, that you will find that they have kind of possession motifs or whatever, or possession storylines, but you wouldn't necessarily think of them as a demonic possession movie or an exorcism movie, because exorcisms don't happen in them. But certainly, like the Amityville Horror is essentially a possession film, just maybe without the religious. The clear religious exorcism, because in that all the religious people are just a bit crap. Like, they turn up at the house and just throw up and then leave, or they get blinded. Rod Steiger getting blinded, and there's quite a few other, you could say, some other like films that are like possession movies. Like I'm a huge fan of Lamberto Bava's Demons from the mid 80s, 1985. Which in a sense is a possession movie where, a cinema full of people are watching this scary film and they get kind of possessed by these demons, but it's almost like a zombie film because it's through scratches and cuts. But I suppose what we in our culture, what we would class as a demonic possession movie normally has the counterpoint of some sort of religious ritual to cast it out, i.e. exorcism. And so there are. I mean, the classic is the Exorcist, of course, from the early 70s. But what's interesting about the Exorcist, I find, is that you can compare it with, say, The Omen, which was another massive film. Both brilliant horror films, I think. But in The Omen, for example, you would say that the devil comes across as much more impressive, as in he's like this master strategist. He's planning to dominate the world. Whereas in The Exorcist, he's just surprisingly juvenile. He's just wanting to like freak people out and say shocking things. And I don't know what's going on there. Like, I don't know if is this the devil's way of letting off a bit of steam? Like so he's taken over the world, but then occasionally he'll possess a couple of people just for the larks, or is he just so desirous of human torment that he'll do anything on a large or a small scale to cause it? I don't know what it is, but in a way, the Exorcist is a very small view of what the devil likes to do. It's just like messing around, having a laugh.
It's a weekend. He had a quiet weekend, so he filmed it. He filled it with the possession. It is a really good point. I mean, they sort of. I'd never thought of it that it is a small film because, whether it be the devil or the demon Pazuzu or whoever, they never really clarify in the film or the book.
Yeah.
But it's that thing of like, well, really, you're only taking this one soul and possibly challenging another in the form of sort of like Father Dyer and that sort of thing. So. It is interesting. It's sort of like it sort of is, but The Omen is much more interesting and sort of, like say an epic. Takeover.
And particularly Omen 3, the final conflict. I mean, it's just it's a kind of much more ambitious program. Like, he's got a much more ambitious itinerary.
Yes,
this weekend, take over the world, murder all the babies that are born on a certain day. All this sort of stuff. Take over the American embassy. Whereas in The Exorcist, it's like make a girl masturbate with a cross and stick a mum's face in it. It's like, oh, okay.
That's like the bro version, isn't it? Really? That's sort of the fraternity version of possession.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You hit on something I hadn't actually thought about really, but I recently did a series of shows on the Satanic Panic.
Oh yeah, lovely.
Of the 80s, and I went back and looked at everything, sort of like the roots of it, from the sort of like the occult counterculture of the 60s through to sort of like the Manson family and the growth of the Church of Satan and everything else, and then through to the sort of like the 70s and sort of what is often deemed as sort of like what they call the Satanist trilogy of Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, and The Omen, and how that all grew. And so you see the sort of the growth of this sort of what is called the New Christian Right in America, and these evangelists and stuff. But one of the weird things is when you actually get to the sort of the meat of the panic. I mean, forgetting all the sort of the bizarre preschool trials and that sort of thing. There was a legit fear for some of these people that demons were real, and whether they are or not, but they legitimately believe they're real, and that things such as Dungeons and Dragons, Saturday morning TV cartoons,
He-Man, that was seen as
He-Man,
bad.
yeah,
I don't know why.
Certain films, certain books were actually channeling and were created due to demonic or and devil influence. And it's fascinating to see that fear, that real fear, was there.
Hugely
for some of these people.
And I find that stuff fascinating. I mentioned earlier that I write for the 14 Times, and I'm the issue out at the moment. I wrote the cover story, which was about this kind of cartoonist, this Christian evangelical cartoonist called Jack Chick, who has been notorious for fueling the satanic panic or helping to fuel it through these little kind of cartoon tracts. And throughout that, yes, it's basically everything is a source of.
I talked about him. I have. I've got a book and it's got sort of like some of his work and stuff in it. It's fascinating. His take on things. Of the one in particular I remember reading was he shows some people playing Dungeons and Dragons and someone's character dies and it leads them to commit suicide because their character in the game is. And it basically ends with sort of like Dungeons and Dragons is evil.
Like, wow,
definitely. That took a sort of
Yeah, and Chick saw pretty much everything as evil, particularly the Catholic Church. He thought he claimed that the Vatican had a supercomputer that had the name of every Protestant on it, and that they'd been organizing assassinations for years, and that they were behind all sorts of shenanigans. But yeah, and this idea of like the devil in music and in Halloween. Celebrations and all that sort of stuff, and it's I find this whole thing both fascinating and tragically depressing because it's put off a kind of a generations of people to Christianity. For me, I was very anti-Christianity growing up precisely because of this sort of ridiculous rhetoric that was you can't watch He-Man. I mean, come on, give me a break. I like He-Man, and it just puts people off. And it was only in my early 20s when I kind of started thinking about spirituality, perhaps, and asking big questions. And I was meeting normal, everyday, intelligent people who were also Christians. I thought, oh, well, maybe this could be for me. But for many people, the ridiculousness of those claims just make Christianity seem like an absolute joke. Like, who the heck would want to join a religion that says you're never allowed to watch a film that's over 18 certificate, or you can't... Like, I was in a band once. I toured with a band in England and Germany. Where was it? Yeah, it was after university. That was it. I was a singer for a while. And I remember we played in a church once, and the vicar said... you can't put your drums there. You have to put them underneath the cross. And we were like, yeah, the acoustics there are crap. What are you talking about? We need them over there and put them in a like Perspex cage type thing for the sound. And he went, no, you need them under the cross because that will sanctify the beat. And it's like, what?
Fair enough.
Yeah, and it's like, well, there's something dangerous about the beat of a drum that will bring... And those sorts of ideas just, to most normal people, just sound stupid and funny. And sad. And I recently interviewed a guy called Lucian Greaves, who was the kind of the head guy for the Satanic Temple, who one of the most prominent sort of Satanist groups in the world at the moment. And he was saying about how so many of his recruits and his, they don't follow him, they follow, Satanism as an idea. And they're good people, by the way. I'm not knocking them. That's not what I'm saying. But these people joined Satanism because they were burned by evangelical Christians in the 80s, telling them that they couldn't play Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. And it's just silly. It's stupid to me. Yeah.
It's a bizarre sort of thing, and it comes back to. Sometimes I think it comes back to sort of fear mongering and lack of real information. Sort of those that sort of shout loudest, unfortunately, get heard most. And it always seems to start with, and who will think of the children?
Well, yeah, precisely. And children were making claims, that they'd been like abused by their families with loads of people with robes on. But then some of these ideas were actually kind of pretty much placed there by the people who were interviewing these kids, and they were like putting ideas into the kids' heads. And
Yeah, I mean, you'll have heard of sort of like Michelle Remembers.
yes, yeah.
So I literally read the book. I got a copy.
Oh, well done, you.
And I read it. Well, yeah. Well, you say well done. It was a slog.
Yeah.
But
That's
then
nice
sort
and
of,
thorough.
It's when you do see the result of this book on the public, and especially when it was used as a reference piece for social services in parts of America, especially in California.
Yep.
Led to a lot of people spending time in prison for things that they did not do. But
I know, it's horrendous.
and so that sort of, to come back to this idea of possession, though, it sort of I think it shows how I would say appreciative of the fact that the church does actually acknowledge that there are people that are easily influenced, there are people that are sort of maybe looking for attention or looking for something, and we've got to weed those people out for their own sake more than our just as much as the sort of the churches to make sure that they get the right attention or the right sort of support.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a quick story would be, I was doing an interview on a Christian radio station once, and I found out later that the presenter had asked her friends to pray for her because she knew I was coming, and she'd found out the sort of things I'm into, and had thought, well, this guy potentially could have something demonic with him. Because if I'm liking horror films and writing scary things and stuff, I must clearly be, or like the paranormal, for example, I must clearly be demonic. So but what the irony, I think, is for these people who are thinking everyone's possessed or, that the devil's around every corner, for me, actually, they inflate the devil beyond the devil's capability. They make the devil much more significant than he really is. In my worldview as a Christian, I don't see like a yin and yang type approach where God is 50% on one side and the devil is 50% on another, and this is like this tug of war for humanity. Christianity clearly teaches that like God is God and the devil does exist, but he's not the be all and end all. And so sometimes I find, ironically, the Christians who claim to worship God loads actually I end up focusing on the devil more than they need to. I like the devil stuff just because I like the entertainment of it, and I find it interesting. But there was a time in my Christian life when I was told to stop watching horror films when I first became a Christian, and I thought, oh yeah, because I suppose that could be a doorway for Satan to get me or whatever. And I stopped watching it. And the devil had never been more scary in those years than when I was doing that, because I thought, oh my goodness, a slasher film called Madman, which I really like, it's just been released on DVD again, and I want to watch that. And I love that. Does that mean, am I succumbing to the devil? And it was like this crazy tussle. And then it was only a few years after that when I started to, I think, wise up and think, it's just a film, I just enjoy this stuff. And so I think for some Christians, the devil is way more bigger than he needs to be. Just chill out.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, for you, it was obviously the emphasis that was put onto horror films and stuff, and what they represented. But again, like you said, looking at some of these the films and things we've talked about, the things that sort of that people have taken and ran with as being that sort of representation of the devil, and the one that sort of I think sort of springs to mind from this conversation is like talking boards or Ouija boards. Oh yes, yeah. So this notion that sort of like they weren't invented until sort of like around the early 1900s. They were invented as sort of a game. The word Ouija, there's many potential where it came from, but some have said it sort of comes from oui and ja, which is obviously yes and yes and that sort of thing. And there's other bits and pieces. It's a made up word or whatever. But it was basically it was sold as a game. Yeah, for many, many years. And, it was a parlour game and all this other stuff. I mean, granted, it was never condoned by the church or this other stuff, but it was sold pretty successfully for years in toy shops. And it wasn't really until The Exorcist and the sort of that 70s era that started to highlight these that oh my God, actually these are a gateway for evil. And all of a sudden, now I know people that were like, I wouldn't have one in my house. And you're a bit like, so what? You wouldn't have Monopoly in your house, or sort of Scrabble?
I mean, I suppose that I can see why people would differentiate between like a Ouija board and say Monopoly, because there is obviously a risk of fragmenting your own psyche when you're playing with a Ouija board, because like for example, when I was a teenager, me and my friends did the Ouija board loads, and then I did it by myself quite a lot because I saw that like the film Witchboard, which I always quite liked from the mid-80s. That was a cool film, and I just thought, actually, this is part of my quest to find evidence of the supernatural. So why don't I do this by myself? And I suppose there would have been a risk for me to almost like fragment my own psychology there, where I could be having conversations with myself, through a board, or if there's such a thing as a supernatural, maybe contacting things that were not very helpful on us. I just don't know, but yeah, I know lots of people are really jumpy about the Ouija board, and including people who aren't Christians or paranormal researchers or whatever. Did you know, by the way, about the guy? There was a guy who he's like an entrepreneur who's called William Fuld, and he started to like really kind of mass produce the Ouija board, and he didn't like the 20s became a millionaire through Ouija sales. But what was interesting was something happened in 1927 to him when on the 24th of February, I think that year, he fell 3 stories from the factory roof from the Ouija, where they were making the Ouija boards. And he managed to grab an open window, but like a scene from a kind of horror movie, the window slammed shut while I was holding it, and he plunged to the ground and was hurt. And then he got into a hospital. So he got taken to the hospital in a car, and it looked like he was going to survive, but they hit a bump in the road, and one of his broken ribs stabbed him in the heart. And so basically the factory that he built to build the Ouija board was the Ouija board itself had told him to build this factory, apparently. And so he built the factory, but it ended up killing him in the end. Great story.
That's like all kinds of Final Destination.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Did you just say that happened on the 24th of February? In the sort of,
oh my goodness, yeah. Whoa. I didn't think of that.
No, so that's sort of like at some point around, almost around 100 years ago that happened. Maybe
wow. Yeah, it is 24th February.
I do find sort of the whole talking board and these things sort of interesting, and even to the extent of we sort of talked about sort of off air. Actually, we talked about sort of Ghostwatch and from the early 90s. And that sort of led on to this idea of most haunted. Mm-hmm. And to me, one of the things I was just curious about was especially sort of, as we said, I love the fact that Matt Hunter is so incredibly sort of like the whole thing's very British, and that's great.
Yeah.
Is this idea of sort of like, I mean, God rest his soul or whatever, but was Derek Acora, for me.
Oh yeah,
was one of these first sort of characters.
Mary loves Dick. have you seen that clip of him? I love it. Mary loves
times.
Dick.
I think I remember I was watching it. I was watching that show from the very start. Man. I saw that episode first time round.
Pure gold. That is.
The idea of that side, but the idea of like the spiritualist or the medium being on TV and being able to channel a spirit and all that other stuff.
Yes.
Whether I believed it or not, you said sort of before, whether you're an atheist or a theist, sort of like there was something creepy and sort of scary about that.
Yeah, actually, it's a good point, and it is in a sense like it feels possession based in the sense that suddenly, they're kind of talking with the voice of the dearly departed ones and stuff, and it's funny, because when it comes to these kind of psychics and stuff, I do have a cynical streak about everything, as well as an openness. So I think that's just the way my brain works. So I'm quite happy to be cynical about, even cynical about religion, sometimes. But when you see these psychics and stuff, sometimes my natural default is like, oh yeah, all right. But then occasionally, you hear them say things to people, and you think, like, and I mean, like, people you know. And like my mum told me a story the other night she'd never told me before, from her youth, and I was like, so where a kind of psychic person or whatever, medium, had said something about someone she'd lost recently, and I was like, I'm not prepared to say there's nothing to that, but it's Mary Loves Dick was still funny.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever seen?
Unfortunately, no matter how legit he ever was, or how groundbreaking he could have been, he's always going to be remembered for Mary Loves Dick.
Oh yeah, dear me. Have you ever seen Satan from 1974, which is the Turkish version of The Exorcist? That's fun. Yeah, you should check that out. It's not like just inspired by The Exorcist, but it's literally like a zero restraint photocopy, even down to the unauthorized use of tubular bells in the opening credits. It basically
Wow.
it's amazing. It was part of this in Turkish cinema in the 60s to 80s. There was this thing called Yeşilçam or something. It means green pine. Where the people in Turkey would just remake Hollywood hits because it was cheaper than licensing the original. So the Turkish Star Wars was called The Man Who Saved the World, and
I've seen that.
oh, have you? Fantastic.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
I think the Turkish Rambo was called Rampage. Turkish E.T. was called Buddy. And my favorite one now, the Turkish Star Trek, was called Omar the tourist on a Star Trek or something. But anyway, so they did a version of The Exorcist, and I quite like it. I mean, it's ridiculous, and the Pazuzu statue is terrible, and the head spinning stuff, it's just all laughable. But what's interesting about the film is Turkey. The major religion of Turkey is Islam, and so the Catholicism, which is so prevalent in The Exorcist, is kind of largely removed from the film, and it's not like the Turkish people insert lots of Islamic equivalents, but The Exorcist turns up with some Zamzam water, for example, which is Muslim holy water, which you take from a sacred well in Mecca, and it's I don't know, it's just got its own. It's got a bit of its own personality, while also being a blatant photocopy of the original. But it's quite funny.
I do find that's fast. I'm going to track that down. I didn't know that existed. I will definitely watch some of those. Cause I've seen the Star Wars one. I think that might even still be on. That might even be on YouTube. I may have seen that, something like that. But yeah, because I think sort of with sort of, and I'm maybe way off base here. So if I've got any sort of Muslim listeners, I'm sorry. But obviously we talk about demons and stuff within sort of that sort of Judeo-Christian sort of ideal that I'm used to in the West. But they have like jinn, don't they? And sort of, which is a sort of a similar thing, but that sort of come out of the desert, and there'll be there's jinn possession and stuff. In sort of Islam.
Yeah, that's right. And I just reviewed an interesting film called Under the Shadow, I think it was called, which was like sort of like Islamic horror movie, as it were, which was actually very good.
Is it called Living Under the Shadow?
I think it was just called Under the Shadows. It's it's set in like the 1980s Iran-Iraq war.
Yes, it's on Netflix. Yeah.
Oh, it's on Netflix. I see.
It is. Yeah, it's worth seeing. I thought it was. Quite good.
Yeah. Well, I reviewed it in my column this month in the 14 Times, and it was it was good. But yeah, there's the jinn. I think it's like in Arabic mythology, this kind of interesting sort of evil spirit changes shape and stuff.
Yeah. So really, I think we've travelled around possession quite sort of thoroughly.
Yeah.
Which I think I really enjoyed that. But I think So we've gone through some of the films. I think there's some great films worth checking out from a horror perspective. But I think I would say to listeners, if you do find that there's something interesting in this or whatever, then like you say, do the research, because there's. I will say, obviously be careful what you read and what you listen to, because there's some utter crap out there. But look into it, because there is a fascinating other world out there that's sort of around this belief system. So
well, there is, and like we started at the beginning when we're talking about my book, it's that this is not something, we're not talking about something that is old news. We're not like, oh, can you remember in the 70s when exorcism was a thing? It's actually quite, funny enough, in this new novel at the acknowledgements section, I think I say something like, and this is my Matt Hunter book on current affairs. Like, it's, in a way, it's the most current book of them all. But it's about the ancient ritual of exorcism. And I think that's where the irony lies. And I've always found the sociology and that sort of stuff quite interesting. What's going on in our culture, and particularly one of the themes of this book is to explore cancel culture and how basically we live in a society that so easily demonizes the other through social media or whatever. And we are experts par excellence these days of turning another person into a demon because of something they've done or some sort of slip up, and that was certainly something I wanted to explore in the book too. So yeah, interesting stuff.
It is, and so really, what's here? So the book Possessed is out. It's out there now. It's out there in paperback. It's out there in digital.
Yeah, an audiobook. The audiobook comes out March 1st.
Okay, excellent. So it's out there in all formats. It's the 4th book in the Matt Hunter series. So if you haven't checked it out, what I would say is, obviously I've only read the first 2, but I would say they're very sort of relatively standalone. But I would say
they are.
Go start at the beginning. But if you want to just pick it up. I
sure.
highly recommend you try these out.
Oh, thank you.
But Peter, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. It's been fun.
No, it's been great, and I'm sure I'll have you on again in the future, and we'll think of some other horror topics to talk about.
Yeah, there's always stuff to talk about. Lovely.
Excellent.
Right,
Thank
take care.
You very much. You too. I'll speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Another great 20th Century Geek episode. Thank you for listening. If you would like to get in contact to suggest topics for future shows, or just chat about everything nerdy, you can email me at 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. That's 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. Or find me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Just search for 20th Century Geek. If you would like to support the show, please go on your podcast catcher and leave a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate it. It raises the show in the ranks and lets more people know about the podcast. If you want to show more support for the podcast, we do have an Amazon wishlist. Just go on Amazon and search for 20th Century Geek, and you will find a list of books that will help with research for future podcasts. And don't forget, we love second-hand books in 20th Century Towers. Once again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.